Part 1. The seduction begins. The chandeliers glimmered like captive stars above the ballroom, spilling light across velvet gowns, polished marble, and the low hum of ambition. Everyone who mattered in the city seemed to be here tonight. Politicians, investors, socialites with icy smiles and sharper tongues. They had all come to celebrate the Blackwells, the family whose empire had woven itself into every street, every deal, every desperate life clutching for survival. And into this nest of power and vanity walked Isabella. Her gown was not the most lavish, though it clung to her figure with quiet defiance, crimson silk against the flood of pale golds and silvers. Her jewels were understated, but her poise, her deliberate grace, made heads turn. She had studied for this moment. Every step, every tilt of her chin, every carefully timed smile had been rehearsed like a weapon. She was not here to admire the chandeliers, nor to sip champagne. She was here to destroy. In her chest burned the memory of her father's broken voice, the night their company collapsed under a Blackwell takeover. She remembered the hollow of her mother's eyes, the silence at the dinner table where laughter used to live. She remembered the foreclosure notices, the creditors, the humiliation. She remembered swearing that one day, somehow, the Blackwells would pay. And tonight, she had found her chance. Across the ballroom, standing in a circle of admirers, was Damien Blackwell. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a sharp purple suit that seemed made to fit his sculpted frame. His expression was the same one she had seen in newspapers and financial magazines. Unreadable, commanding, a mask of control. He shook hands, received praise, let others orbit him as though he were the gravity that held the room together. Isabella's pulse quickened. She had spent months studying him, reading every profile, analyzing every rumor, memorizing the cadence of his interviews. Cold, calculating, untouchable. He had inherited the empire and expanded it with merciless precision. A man feared more than loved, but respected by all. And now she would seduce him, make him fall, and when his heart was bare and his guard down, she would break him. She approached the bar first, ordering a glass of champagne she barely touched. She let the light strike her face just so, the curve of her neck angled toward his line of sight. It took only minutes before she felt his gaze brush across her. Not a lingering stare, just a flicker, as if he had noticed an unfamiliar constellation in his sky. Good. Let him notice. Let him wonder. Clara's warning echoed in her memory from earlier that evening. You're playing with fire, Isabella. He'll scorch you before you ever wound him. But Isabella had only smiled. That's the point. Fire doesn't scare me. Now. As Damien's eyes found her a second time, she felt a flicker of nerves she hadn't expected. His stare was sharp, assessing, but also intrigued. He excused himself from the circle of men and women around him, moving with the kind of confidence that belonged to someone who had never once been refused anything in his life. When he stopped in front of her, the music swelled, strings sweeping across the air like a signal. You don't belong here, he said softly, his tone cool but curious. Isabella let the faintest smile touch her lips. And yet, here I am. A flicker of amusement crossed his otherwise hard face. He extended his hand. Damien Blackwell. She did not feign surprise. She knew him too well already. She took his hand, letting her touch linger a beat longer than necessary. Isabella. He repeated her name as though testing the sound. Isabella. Then, leaning slightly closer, his voice dropped. Most women here try too hard. You don't seem to care at all. Why is that? She tilted her head, eyes steady. Maybe I don't find power impressive. Maybe I prefer honesty to wealth. It was a risk, taunting him in his own ballroom. But his lips curved, just barely, into what might have been a real smile. That was the first spark. The night stretched on in a rhythm Isabella controlled with invisible strings. She allowed him small victories, her laugh at a sharp remark, her apparent curiosity at his guarded answers. She retreated when she sensed his interest, only to return when his eyes sought her again. He was not the kind of man accustomed to pursuit, and the unfamiliarity of it unsettled him. She saw it in the way he leaned closer, the way he asked questions not to fill silence, but to uncover her. And all the while, Ethan watched. Damien's right-hand man stood near the edge of the ballroom, tall and broad with suspicion etched across his brow. His gaze followed Isabella each time she crossed the room, his jaw tightening whenever Damien's attention fixed on her. She could almost hear the silent warning radiating from him. "Who are you? And what do you want from him?" Later, when she excused herself to the powder room, Clara was waiting in the corridor, having slipped into the gala through Isabella's carefully arranged invitation. "You're too deep already," Clara hissed, catching Isabella's wrist. "Do you even hear yourself when you talk about him? You swore this was revenge, nothing more. But I saw the way you looked at him just now." Isabella pulled free, her voice cool. "I'm doing exactly what I came here to do. He's falling for it." Clara shook her head. "No, you're falling." The words lingered like a bruise long after Isabella returned to the ballroom. Hours passed, conversations blending into music and laughter. Yet no matter where she moved, Damien appeared, as though the rest of the crowd were nothing but noise. He spoke little about himself, but his eyes carried a weight, a hunger, as if he were desperate to trust someone yet unwilling to admit it. Isabella filed every detail away, another weapon for later. As the gala waned and guests began to trickle out, Damien approached her once more, his voice lower, almost intimate. "You didn't answer my question earlier." She raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "Why are you here?" Her lips curved. "Why are you asking?" He studied her, then reached past to pluck 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray. He handed one to her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Because I don't believe in coincidences. People don't just appear in my world. They come with reasons." She let the glass rest in her hand, swirling the bubbles. "Maybe my reason is simple." "And what is it?" Her gaze met his, unwavering. A kiss. The shock in his eyes was brief, but unmistakable. Then the corner of his mouth curved, sharp, and dangerous. The balcony door stood open behind him, the night air brushing through with a whisper of temptation. Without another word, Damien stepped aside, inviting her into the darkness beyond the chandeliers. And Isabella, pulse thrumming with both victory and fear, stepped into the night with him, knowing this was the moment her game truly began. Part 2. Lines blur. The city skyline shimmered in the half-light of dusk, 1,000 scattered lights glowing like restless fireflies against the horizon. Isabella leaned on the cool railing of her terrace, staring at the city she had once loved and now merely endured. She had followed Damien's movements for days, since the gala, the meetings, the places he trusted enough to frequent, the rare cracks in his otherwise unyielding composure. Every detail was another piece of the puzzle she would use to break him. She reminded herself that this was why she was here, why she had entered his world like a shadow sliding through a locked door. She had come to destroy the man who ruined her family, not to feel her pulse quicken at the thought of him, not to remember the depth of his voice, or the way his eyes lingered on her, as if they were searching past her defenses. She whispered into the wind, "This is strategy, nothing more." But the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The next evening, she walked into a small cafe on a quiet corner of the city. Damien sat in the far booth, his posture as composed as ever, though there was something in the way his shoulders loosened when he looked out the window that betrayed a rare softness. He glanced up, and when his gaze landed on her, something flickered surprise, then the faintest trace of a smile. It was not the smile of a ruthless heir, but of a man caught off guard. She slid into the seat across from him, her expression unreadable. "Evening," she murmured. "Evening," he replied, studying her as though she were an unsolved equation. "I didn't expect you here. Perhaps I like to surprise people." She let her lips curve slightly, letting the moment linger. A chuckle slipped from him, quiet and unforced. The sound unsettled her more than anger would have. For an hour they spoke of meaningless things. Weather, traffic, passing details of the city, yet beneath every sentence pulsed an unspoken tension. When the waiter set down their drinks, Damien's hand touched her. Electricity jolted through her, but she kept her composure. "Careful," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, voice calm, but his eyes sharp. "For falling." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't fall," she tilted her head, almost amused. "That's what they all say." It became a rhythm in the days that followed. He appeared in her spaces, cafes, bookstores, streets she walked as though by chance. And though she knew she should resist, Isabella began to anticipate his presence, the way her chest tightened when she sensed his approach. Every interaction was layered, a careful dance of provocation and restraint. She gifted him fleeting glances, half smiles, and laughter that she had not realized still lived inside her. He, in turn, gave her attention that bordered on fixation, his gaze following her as if she were the only fixed star in his night. But the game was shifting, becoming something Isabella had not intended. She found herself recalling his voice at night, and worse, craving it. Clara's warning rang in her ears. "You swore this was about revenge, Isabella. Not this." Isabella would close her eyes and whisper, "I know what I'm doing," but doubt gnawed at her edges. When Damien invited her to his family's private gallery, she dressed with deliberate precision, an emerald gown that shimmered under the lights, hair pinned in elegant waves. As she stepped inside, the air seemed charged, a mingling of power and history. He moved beside her, guiding her toward a storm-painted canvas, his voice low. "You walk this room like you own it," he said quietly. "And yet, you don't belong. It's as if you're here on your own terms." She pretended to study the painting, the sea crashing against jagged rocks. "Perhaps I like to think I can stand against chaos." His gaze deepened. "And do you?" She hesitated, the truth slipping through her mask. "I do." For a breath, silence pressed between them, heavy and intimate. Damien, usually impenetrable, seemed suddenly fragile, as if admitting to himself that she had already unsettled him. Later, with the city glittering beyond the gallery's windows, he confessed in a voice just above a whisper. "People think I'm heartless. They believe everything I do is calculated. But sometimes, I just want to be understood." Her chest tightened. "And can you be?" He exhaled, the faintest shadow of a smile, tugging at his lips. "That's why I'm talking to you." Back at her apartment, Clara's voice was sharp, laced with fear. "You're falling." "I'm not," Isabella said quickly, though her words trembled. "You swore this was revenge, but with him? You don't control anything. That's what makes this dangerous." Isabella forced a laugh, masking the storm inside her. "I'll be fine." But even as she spoke, her mind replayed every moment with Damien, the way his smile reached places she thought dead. Suspicion festered elsewhere. Ethan, Damien's shadow and guardian, had been watching. One afternoon he caught Isabella leaving Damien's office, a folder in her hands. His eyes were sharp, his tone edged with warning. "You're hiding something." She tilted her head, calm. "And yet here you are, talking to me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If I'm wrong, then you're simply extraordinary at deception. But if I'm right," his gaze hardened, "then you're poison." She let the silence stretch before answering. "Perhaps we're all a little poisoned in this world." And with that, she slipped past him, though her pulse raced. The days rolled forward, each one binding her more tightly into the web she had spun. She and Damien shared quiet corners of the city cafes, moonlit streets, rooftops where the skyline stretched endlessly. With each moment, her laughter sounded less like a weapon and more like something real. His attention was steady, unwavering, and she began to feel the weight of her duplicity pressing harder against her chest. One evening, on a secluded rooftop, the city spread wide beneath them. Damien broke the silence. "You've changed me," he admitted, his voice stripped of pretense. "I thought I was untouchable, but you terrify me, and yet I can't stop." Her throat tightened. She whispered, "Does that scare you?" "Yes," he said simply, and then his lips found hers. The kiss was raw, desperate, and entirely human. Isabella returned it, every nerve alive, her resolve crumbling under the force of something she had sworn to resist. She wanted to pull away, to remember her plan, her family, the ruin that had driven her here. But instead she leaned into him, consumed by the storm of longing and guilt. When she finally broke free, breathless, her hand brushed against the satchel she carried. Inside was the journal, her every secret, every plan, every step written in ink. The record of her betrayal pressed against her like a brand, heavier than stone. She looked at Damien, his eyes searching hers with unguarded hope. For a heartbeat, she almost confessed. But the mission still clawed at her. She whispered, barely audible, "It's not over." He did not answer, but in his gaze she saw the storm brewing, the recognition that this game was no longer a simple dance of power. Desire and deception were entwined now, inseparable, and the cost of what they had begun would not be easily measured. The night around them seemed to hold its breath, as though the city itself sensed the danger in their closeness. Isabella turned away, clutching the satchel tighter, knowing the fragile line between revenge and love had blurred beyond return. And Damien, silent, watched her retreat into the shadows, his heart caught between suspicion and an ache he could no longer deny. Part 3. Love and Betrayal. The days after Damien's kiss lingered like smoke in Isabella's mind, impossible to grasp, impossible to dismiss. She had replayed that moment 1,000 times in the stillness of her apartment, torn between guilt and longing. His lips, his touch, his unguarded vulnerability. It had shaken her more deeply than any weapon could. She had promised herself this was a mission of vengeance, a carefully laid plan, and yet, her heart betrayed her, pulling her toward the very man she had sworn to ruin. She told herself it was strategy, that every smile she returned, every glance she held too long, was simply another thread in the web she wove. But the truth gnawed at her in the silence of night. She was no longer certain which parts of her performance were lies, and which were dangerously real. Damien seemed to sense this shift. He watched her differently now, with an attentiveness that unsettled her. His usual mask of command slipped more often, replaced by flashes of warmth and trust. He spoke to her of things no one else knew: his childhood by the cliffs, the mother he had lost too soon, the hollow victories of building an empire only to find himself alone at the top. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said once, during a late evening walk. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Pretend?" she asked, her tone carefully measured. "That you're untouchable," he replied, his gaze steady on hers. "I see the strength in you, Isabella, but I also see the sorrow." She had wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words lodged too deep. For a heartbeat, she nearly told him everything about her father, about the betrayal that had shattered her world. But she bit it back, hiding truth behind a practiced smile. "You read too much into people," she whispered, forcing a lightness she did not feel. "Only when they matter," Damien said. The admission sank into her bones, leaving her restless. Their bond deepened, and with it, the boundaries of her mission frayed. They shared stolen hours in quiet corners, moments laced with laughter that neither expected. She found herself memorizing the curve of his smile, the cadence of his voice, the way his eyes softened when he spoke her name. He was no longer a faceless enemy. He was flesh, blood, and a heart that beat vulnerably close to her own. But shadows gathered at the edges of their fragile connection. Ethan's suspicions sharpened into certainty. He tracked her, his instincts telling him Isabella was not who she claimed to be. Each time she crossed paths with him, his stare was a warning, an unspoken threat that the truth would soon unravel. One evening, as she left Damien's office, Ethan blocked her path in the dim corridor. His jaw was tight, his eyes cold with mistrust. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. She arched a brow, feigning calm. "And what game is that?" "Damien may be blinded by whatever he thinks he feels for you, but I'm not. I know there's more to you than the charming smile you wear like armor, and I'll find out what it is." She stepped closer, her voice smooth as silk. "Be careful, Ethan. Obsession has a way of clouding judgment. You might end up seeing things that aren't there." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Or I might uncover exactly what you're hiding." She walked past him, her pulse quickened. Ethan was dangerous not because he suspected, but because he was right. The following week, Damien invited her to his family's estate for a private dinner. The house stood like a fortress on the hill, its halls lined with portraits of generations of Blackwell's stern faces, proud and cold. Isabella moved through the space with poise, but each step carried the weight of memory. This was the legacy that had crushed her own family, the empire built on ashes she knew too well. At dinner, the atmosphere was strangely intimate. Damien had dismissed most of the staff, leaving only candlelight flickering between them. He poured her wine, his eyes lingering on her with an intensity that unsettled her resolve. "Do you ever wonder," he asked softly, "if fate puts certain people in our path for a reason?" She hesitated, caught off guard. "And what reason would that be?" "To remind us we're human," he said, his voice rawer than she had ever heard it. Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him that fate had put her in his path for vengeance, not love. That every step she had taken was calculated, deliberate. But when she opened her mouth, the words betrayed her. "Sometimes," she whispered. I think fate is cruel. His hand reached her hand, covering hers. The warmth of his touch spread through her like fire. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken truths, with confessions neither dared to make. Later that night, Damien led her to the library. A vast room filled with leather-bound volumes and the scent of history. He poured them brandy, the amber liquid catching the firelight. As they sat near the hearth, he told her of his father, a man of ruthless ambition, a man Damien both admired and resented. I was raised to believe weakness was a sin, he said, staring into the flames. That trust was a liability. But you make me question that. Isabella's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that trust could indeed be fatal, that weakness could destroy lives. But the vulnerability in his tone disarmed her. For the first time, she saw not Damien Blackwell the tycoon, but Damien the man, flawed, burdened, yearning for something more. Their lips met again that night. The kiss deeper, hungrier, filled with both desire and despair. She told herself it was a weapon, another step in her plan, but her trembling hands betrayed her. When he whispered her name, it was not the voice of an enemy, but of a man laying his heart bare. In the days that followed, Isabella's world blurred further. She oscillated between nights of passion and mornings of self-reproach. Clara's warnings echoed in her mind, a voice of reason she struggled to silence. You're falling, Clara had said. And if you fall, Isabella, you'll never rise again. Yet Isabella couldn't stop herself. She found excuses to see him, lingered longer than necessary, let her defenses weaken piece by piece. She was becoming entangled in the very web she had spun. But betrayal was never far. Ethan confronted Damien privately, his voice sharp with concern. She's not who you think she is, Ethan warned. There's something in her eyes, secrets she doesn't want you to see. Damien dismissed him at first, but doubt had been planted. Isabella noticed it in the way he studied her more carefully, in the questions he asked that cut too close to the truth. One evening he caught her alone in his office, her hand hovering over a locked drawer in his desk. She had been searching for documents, proof of his role in her family's downfall. What are you doing? His voice was calm, but edged with suspicion. She spun, masking her fear with a faint smile. I was looking for a pen. His gaze lingered, weighing her words. For a moment, she thought he would press further, but instead he stepped back, his expression unreadable. That night, Isabella wrote in her hidden journal, her hand trembling. I'm losing control. I came here for vengeance, but my heart betrays me at every turn. Damien is both the enemy and the only man who has ever made me feel alive. How do I destroy him when part of me longs to protect him? The answer never came. The turning point arrived on a storm-lashed evening. Damien had invited her to the cliffs outside the city, a place he rarely shared with anyone. The sea roared below, waves crashing violently against the rocks. The wind whipped around them, wild and unforgiving. This is where I come when I need to remember who I am, Damien said, his voice nearly lost in the storm. And who are you? Isabella asked, her heart pounding. His eyes locked on hers. A man who no longer knows, not since you. The confession shook her. She wanted to tell him everything then, that she was the daughter of the man his family had destroyed, that every step of their relationship had been born of vengeance. But before she could speak, he drew her into his arms and kissed her with a desperation that silenced her confession. Lightning split the sky, illuminating them in stark relief, two souls bound by love and betrayal, standing on the edge of ruin. When they finally pulled apart, Damien whispered, "Promise me you won't leave." Her lips trembled, the words she should have spoken burning in her throat. But instead of truth, she gave him the lie he longed for. "I promise." And in that moment, Isabella knew she had doomed them both. For the storm was no longer only in the sky, it was within them, a tempest of passion and deceit, pulling them inexorably toward the breaking point neither could escape. Part 4. The Shattered Promises. The morning after the storm, Isabella woke with Damien's arms wrapped around her, his breath warm against her skin. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself the luxury of stillness, pretending the world beyond that room didn't exist. No revenge, no betrayal, just the fragile illusion of love. But illusions were fragile things, and reality clawed at her conscience with merciless persistence. She slipped from the bed, gathering her clothes in silence, careful not to wake him. Her satchel rested by the chair, heavy with the weight of her hidden journal. She opened it, her hand hovering over the pages filled with secrets, plans, and confessions written in ink that could ruin everything. Her gaze drifted to Damien's sleeping form. Vulnerable. Human. The man she had sworn to destroy. And yet, the thought of him discovering the truth now felt like a blade pressed to her own chest. She closed the journal with trembling fingers, whispering to herself, "Not yet." But fate would not wait for her hesitation. That afternoon, Ethan confronted Damien in the study. The storm had left the skies clear, but the atmosphere inside the Blackwell estate was heavy, tense. "You need to see this," Ethan said, placing a folder on Damien's desk. His voice was grave, his expression carved from stone. Damien frowned, flipping open the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, fragments of a past Isabella had tried desperately to conceal. Her real name. Her father's ruined company. The connection to the Blackwell Empire. At first, Damien laughed in disbelief. "This is a mistake." But Ethan's silence told him otherwise. "Her father was destroyed because of us," Ethan said evenly. "And now she's here, suddenly, weaving her way into your life? You think that's coincidence?" Damien's pulse thundered. Memories of Isabella's hesitation, her carefully chosen words, the moments she had nearly confessed all of it snapped into brutal clarity. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted, as though the storm on the cliffs had followed him into his veins. "She lied," he whispered, the words bitter on his tongue. The next evening, Isabella arrived at the estate, unaware that her carefully spun web had unraveled. Damien greeted her with his usual composure, but his eyes were colder, sharper, watching her as one might study a venomous serpent. They dined together, the silence between them heavy, filled with unspoken accusations. Isabella sensed something was wrong, but she pushed the unease aside, telling herself it was paranoia. Afterward, Damien led her once more to the library. The fire crackled, casting shadows across his face. He poured her wine, his movements precise, almost mechanical. "Tell me something," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "Why did you really come into my life?" Her heart stumbled. "What do you mean? Don't play games, Isabella." His eyes locked onto hers, unyielding. "Who are you, really?" Her breath caught. The lie she had rehearsed countless times hovered on her lips, but for the first time, she couldn't bring herself to speak it. His gaze was too sharp, his suspicion too clear. "Damien," she began softly. Enough," he cut in, his voice low but laced with fury. He thrust the folder onto the table. "I know who you are. I know why you came here." The sight of her past laid bare before her made her blood run cold. She reached for the papers, but he pulled them back, his hand trembling with restrained rage. "Everything between us," he said, his voice breaking. "Every word, every touch. Was it all a lie?" Tears stung her eyes. "No, it started as revenge, yes. I wanted to make you pay for what your family did to mine. But then," her voice faltered, raw with emotion. "Then I saw you, not the Blackwell Empire, not the enemy. You and I." Damien slammed his hand against the table, making her flinch. "You expect me to believe that? That you seduced me out of hatred and then decided you loved me instead?" Her silence was answer enough. For the first time in years, Damien felt something close to despair. The walls he had lowered, the trust he had dared to give, now lay shattered at his feet. "Get out!" he said, his voice cold as steel. "Damien, please! Get out!" he roared, his fury shaking the room. Isabella fled, tears blurring her vision as she clutched her journal to her chest. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing like a final judgment. For days, she wandered the city in torment, torn between the mission she had failed and the love she could not deny. Her plan was in ruins, her heart in tatters. She had wanted to destroy Damien, but in the end, she had destroyed herself. Damien, meanwhile, buried himself in work, trying to erase her from his mind. But every corner of the estate reminded him of her. The library where she laughed softly, the cliffs where she whispered promises, the bed where she had once slept beside him. Rage could not silence memory, and memory could not silence longing. One night, unable to bear the weight of it any longer, Isabella returned to the estate. She found Damien in the library, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes dark and weary. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking at her. "I know," she whispered. "But I had to see you. One last time." Finally, he turned, his gaze hollow. "What more do you want from me? Haven't you taken enough?" She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I want you to know the truth. I came here to ruin you, Damien. I thought if I could make you suffer, I could avenge my family. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my enemy. I fell in love with you. And that is the cruelest twist of all." He laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "Love? You call that love?" Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Yes, because it hurts more than any hatred ever could." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Damien's shoulders sagged, his mask slipping to reveal the man beneath the one she had glimpsed on stormy cliffs and in whispered confessions. "If that's true," he said hoarsely, "then you've doomed us both." She reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "I can't trust you, not after this. Every time I look at you, I'll wonder if it's love or poison." Her hand fell, the distance between them wider than any ocean. "Then this is goodbye." Isabella turned, her footsteps heavy, each one pulling her farther from the only man she had ever truly loved. When she reached the door, Damien's voice stopped her. "Isabella." She looked back, hope flickering in her chest, but his eyes were hollow, his words final. "Some wounds can never heal." Her heart shattered. She nodded once, tears streaming down her face, and disappeared into the night. The days that followed were a blur of grief and regret. Isabella left the city, carrying her journal with her as the only testament to a love twisted by betrayal. Damien returned to his empire, colder than ever, his heart sealed behind walls higher than before. They never saw each other again, yet in the quiet hours of the night, when the city slept and memories rose unbidden, both wondered if love could have saved them, if only honesty had come sooner. But love, like poison, had already done its work. And so their story ended not with triumph, but with ruin. Not with healing, but with scars too deep to fade. Every promise broken, every kiss poisoned, and hearts left shattered beyond repair. To summarize this story, it began as a game of vengeance, every glance and kiss meant to wound. But deception turned to passion, and passion to obsession, until neither Isabella nor Damien could escape what they had created. Love and lies became inseparable, and the truth tore them apart. In the end, their hearts were left in ruins. What should have been salvation became destruction, and every kiss they shared lingered not as comfort, but as poison. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe my channel for more dramatic, intense romances stories. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you for watching.